This video is sponsored by Envato Elements. Envato provides a huge library of creative assets such as graphic elements and templates, stock footage, music, sound effects, fonts, and much more. On top of that, it offers unlimited downloads with an affordable subscription. So, if you're interested, I have provided a link down below in the description, which will take you to their website. And of course, if you do decide to register, I get to earn a commission. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Logo Animations. Today we're animating some esports logos. Let's take a look. Video games are something I'm really into, especially Counter-Strike Global Offensive, hence the logos I chose to animate are from organizations that have active teams in the Counter-Strike pro scene. I made sure to choose logos that would allow us to explore different kinds of techniques such as long shadows, snappy and bouncy movement, offsetting layers with expressions, and how to convey a sense of speed by using the wiggle expression. One thing I want to point out is that for the sake of the tutorial, I've already gone ahead and set up the logo elements beforehand by finding vector files online, importing them in Illustrator for any cleanup, and then sending them over to After Effects. This way we skip the boring setup part and jump straight into the juicy stuff. The project files are going to be available for download on my Gumroad page, so you can follow along right away without having to do any setup work. As of now, all of my project files are using the pay what you want system, so you can grab anything you want for free, but of course any donations would definitely help out with the channel. Let me know in the comments section what your favorite video game is and what your favorite team is within that video game's pro scene, if it has one. I then challenge you to make a logo animation of that team by using techniques that you learn in this tutorial, and if you happen to post it on social media platforms, then make sure to also tag me. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so here we are now in After Effects, and as you can see I have all of the main comps open just in case we need to go back to them. But in the meantime, we'll jump over to these pre-set up tutorial comps so that we can start animating from scratch. Now just to point out, I am working in 30 frames per second, but seeing as this is related to gaming in a way, we could actually pump this up to 60 instead. However, I'm not going to do that for the sake of the tutorial, but if you do want to, you can actually follow along, and then all the way at the end, before you render things out, you can switch this to 60 frames per second. As I said at the beginning, the logo elements for all of these comps are pre-set up just to save ourselves some time. So in this case, we have the Astralis inner star and the Astralis outer star. And I also have a white background here. Now we'll hide the inner star for a moment just so we can focus on the animation for the outer star. And we'll start off by adding an effect called Minimax. And you can do that by either going over to the Effects and Presets panel and type in Minimax, and just drag and drop that in, or even double click while the layer is selected. However, throughout the course of the tutorial, I will be using FX Console, which is a third-party plugin from Video Copilot, but it is totally free. And what it allows you to do is just select the layer and then hit Control Space to bring up this search bar and type in whatever effect you need and hit return to add it. Now the Minimax effect allows us to expand the contours of our layers. Now if we increase the radius, nothing is going to happen yet because the channel that we're using is set to color, but we actually want to set this to alpha and color instead so that it also expands the alpha channel of the layer. Now we do have a problem here, and that is it's expanding in all directions, whereas we want to have control over the direction of the spread. To do that, we'll first switch the direction to just vertical, and now as we increase the radius, you can see it's now expanding it only vertically. And now the other two issues we have to fix is we want it to only expand downwards and also maybe to the left. And to achieve that, we're going to use a technique called Transform Sandwich. We'll go ahead and add a transform effect. We'll bring it before Minimax. And now let's say set the rotation to 45 degrees. Then we'll add another transform effect. And this time we'll set the rotation to minus 45 instead. And you can see now we have a different result. And if you go ahead and increase the radius, it's expanding the logo in a 45-degree angle. Essentially, these two transform effects are canceling each other out. And you can see that more clearly by just shutting these off. So here we have the original logo. Now we rotate it, and now we expand it so it goes vertically, and then we rotate it back to the original state, and now we have a 45-degree rotation. Now the logo is still expanding in both directions, so let's now fix that. And we're going to use another transform effect. So we'll add transform one more time, and we'll actually bring this before transform 2 and after minimax. And this will serve to correct the position of our layer based on the radius of our minimax. And to do that, we're going to use the position value. Let me demonstrate it real quick. So as we increase the Y value, we are now able to push the logo down, as a result, making sure that we're only expanding the logo, or actually faking the illusion that the logo is only being expanded on one direction. So if I right click, reset this, and say click on the Y value and add 106, which is the same as the radius, and then click away, this should now be perfectly in line. So basically we have to make sure we link the Y value of the position to the radius value of the minimax effect. And to automate this even further, we're actually gonna link the rotation value of the second transform to the first transform, so that it is always updating according to this value. And what I'm going to do is add an angle control, which is just an empty controller, and bring it all the way at the top. And we're going to use this to control the rotation. So we'll alt click on the rotation value of the first transform effect and then parent it to the angle control, and just click away because we don't need any extra stuff. Now we can quickly set this back to 45 degrees, and then we'll go down and then alt click on the rotation value of the second transform, pick whip it to the angle control, and before we let go, we'll just multiply it by -1 so that it's always the negative equivalent of the angle control value. And now we can tweak this, and as soon as we let go, you can see that these are updating accordingly. Now let's also set up the other expression. So we'll alt click on the position stopwatch, and to access the X and Y values, we use the following line. So we'll open square bracket and then type in value, open square bracket again, and we'll type in 0 in those square brackets. And basically XYZ correspond to 0, 1, 2. So 0 in this case being X, then we'll do comma, value, and then we'll access the Y value by typing in 1. Value 0, value 1 refers to X and Y, simple as that. But what we want to do is right after the Y value, we want to add the radius value. Now we do want to right click on this and then reset it because we did tweak the value beforehand. So now everything is pretty much dynamic. We can increase this to whatever you want. We can change the angle as well. Speaking of the angle, let's now try to find an angle that matches the logo here. So if we zoom in, we want to match this diagonal line. I believe in the original version, I set it to like -54.4 or something like that. And that's pretty much perfect. Real quick, let's go ahead and also rename these transform effects to transform rotate. Hit Control A, collapse these, and then bring back the minimax and angle control, so we can now finally start animating. Let's first increase the radius so we can fill that in. And for the animation, what I want to do is have the outer star come in like so, and then decrease the radius. So we go back to the original shape. And we could say hit P, set a keyframe there, move forward, set another keyframe, and then go back and maybe have it come in like so and use this line as a guide to match the direction. But that's not a pretty good way of going about it. So we'll Control Z to undo. And instead we'll go ahead and create a new null object, and we'll rename this to, I don't know, position. Then hit R to bring up its rotation and select the outer star, and also lock the effects controls so we can still keep the angle control visible even after we click away. Now we can alt click on the rotation and pick whip it to the angle. So now the null has the same orientation, but it's in the opposite direction. So we'll just click there, type in time -1, and it should flip it the other way around. And if we zoom in here, you can barely make it out, but this line of the null should match the exact angle of this line. Go ahead and parent the outer star to the position null, and then we'll hit P. And you would think that if we decrease or increase the Y value, the logo would move diagonally. However, 2D layers don't take into account their orientation, so they're only moving in world axes mode. And a quick and easy way to fix that would be to just turn this into a 3D layer. And now we can simply use the Y gizmo here. And because we linked the Z rotation to the angle control, this is now moving in the perfect direction. Now there is a slight problem by parenting the layer itself to the position null, and that is if we tweak the angle control, because the rotation of the position is linked to it and the star is linked to the position, we're gonna mess up the orientation of the logo. So instead, let's Control Z, go back. I'm gonna unparent the layer, and I'm just gonna alt click on the position and link only the position. This way we can set the angle and also move the logo. All right, we'll Control Z, go back, And we'll start by animating the position value. So let's set a keyframe there, move this forward a bit. On the first frame, we'll bring this down. And then we can hold down Shift and hit page down twice to move forward by 20 frames. And we'll bring over this keyframe. Then we'll hit F9 to easy ease it. And then right click, go over to keyframe velocity, and we'll set the incoming velocity to 75%. And then hit 0 to ramp preview. And let's say go back by 5 frames. So we'll use page up for that. And then in the minimax effect, we'll set a keyframe for the radius, hit U to bring up the keyframes, and then move forward by 20 more frames. And we'll set this down to 0 and also easy ease this and do 75%. All right, so a lot of setup for just this simple animation, but as I said before, it's all about setting things up in a way that makes it very easy to make any adjustments you want. So in this case, let's say we want to switch the animation to come in from the top right side instead. Well, we can easily do that. We'll just click on the angle and we'll add, say, 180, and this will now be extruding from that angle. Oh, and of course, we do have to go back to the first keyframe and then just move this over to the other side. So you can see in just a few clicks, I was able to change the direction of this entire logo animation. All right, now let's take care of the inner star. What I want to do is set the color to be the same as the outer star, which will of course make it disappear. But all the way at the beginning here, I want to have it scale up. So we'll hit S, set a keyframe there, and we'll go forward by maybe 15 frames. Set a keyframe there, go back, set this down to 0, F9, and then keyframe velocity 75%. And by the way, you could also use the graph editor for adjusting any easing values, but sometimes I like to use the keyframe velocity just to keep things a bit more consistent. And maybe we'll select both of these and shift the position a bit. Right away, one thing you'll notice is the star itself is sitting in the right position based on the logo design. However, it is not sitting in the center of the comp. If I hit Control Home, you can see that now it jumped to the center of the comp. So I actually want to implement that into the animation. So we'll hit P to bring up the position, set a keyframe, we'll move back a bit, and then hit Control Home to again center it to the comp. And we'll have the position shift down to its original as soon as it scales up. And we're actually going to drag these in as well. Hit U. And we'll ease these, maybe right click on this, 75. Quick thing, I am only focusing on the contours of the layer here, but we do need to switch the color back to the red color. But now we're gonna have the opposite problem where the star disappears as the red outer star comes in. So what we're gonna do is add a set matte effect to the outer star, and we'll choose the inner star and invert the matte. So if I disable the inner star, what that's gonna mean is wherever this inner star is visible, in those areas, the outer star is gonna be invisible. So we can now see the gap that's being created by the inner star. And in fact, we can shut off the background so we can see that it is indeed transparent. However, when we go back, the star now disappears because it's not visible. So if we turn it back on, we can now see it, but it's also filling up the gap now. What we need to do is add a set matte effect to the inner star as well, and this time set it to take the matte from the outer star layer and also invert it, which means that this layer is only going to be visible in areas where there is no outer star present. Oh, another quick tip is let's go back just a little bit and we'll go over to the outer star and let's say add a fill effect. Bring this over the set matte. We'll shut it off for a moment, pick this color and maybe darken it down just a little bit, so it's now a bit more like a shadow. What we can do is add the CC composite effect, which will composite the original layer back on top of all of these effects. And now it looks like we have the star coming in and casting sort of like a long shadow. All right, so that's it for the Astralis logo animation. Let's now move on to the next one. Next up, let's take a look at the Navi logo. Again, here I have all of these separate elements that we're gonna be working with. And something I wanna note is this box element. And if I hit R to bring up the rotation, you can see that it's set to minus 19.5, which matches the original logo design. But the reason this is not set to 0 is because I recreated the shape of the box to be laying down flat. The reason behind that is because I want to animate these points to come in from the sides like so, and also have the entire shape scale down vertically, or scale up rather. And by having the box be created, laying down flat, and then rotated after the fact, makes it much easier for us to animate it. As for the letters, they're all sitting at 0% rotation because I don't need to animate the scale or paths or anything like that. So always try to be thinking about ways of setting up your elements in a way that makes it easiest to achieve your animation concepts. Because even though it might take a bit more extra time to set things up, you will then save yourself a lot of time and even end up with better results in the animation stage. All right, now let's start off by creating a new null object, and we'll call this rotation. And we'll select all of these layers and parent it to the rotation null. And this way we can hit R, set it to 19.5, which is the same value as the box rotation value. So now we have a logo laying down flat. And real quick, the reason I'm not parenting the letters to the box itself and then rotate this is because I'm also going to be animating the scale. And so if the letters are parented to the box, then they will also be squished down. So this way I can control the rotation of all the elements and the scale of the box independent of each other. So let's go over to frame, say 10, and then hit S, set a keyframe there. We'll move forward by 20 frames. Set another keyframe, go back, uncheck the constraint proportions, and set the Y value to 0. And then we'll also F9, right click, and we'll do, I don't know, maybe 100%. Because for this Navi logo animation, I actually want to have it very snappy looking. Now let's also go down to the box, and under contents, we want to find the path and set a keyframe for that as well. And bring this over, and we'll just select the 2 points, hold down Shift, and we'll just move these over until they're outside of the screen, and do the same for these ones. F9, 100, and we'll do 20 frames as well. And we'll actually have these start just after the scale comes in. And at this point, we can also have it rotate back to its original state. We'll set a keyframe there, bring this over to line up with the first keyframe of the path animation, and then over here, we'll set it down to 0, and also F9, we'll do 100. We can have some overlap here, so maybe we'll go over to this keyframe, then go back by 5 frames, select both of those, bring these over. It's always nice to have some overlap so that it doesn't seem like the logo is doing one thing, then pausing for a bit, and then doing another thing. All right, now let's animate the letters to come in as well. And we'll go over to this frame so we can see things a bit more clearly. And we'll scroll down, hit T on the background layer, set the opacity to 50%, and uncheck the transparency, so we can see the letters even after we push them off the contours, because the background color is the same as the letters color, so now we can't see them anymore. And we'll select all the letters, hit P, and then set a keyframe for all of those, and then we'll move forward by 10 frames, bring these over here. By the way, you can snap things to keyframes or the playhead by holding down Shift as you move them. Now we'll go back and we'll start animating these. So we'll have the left side of the N letter come in from the bottom. And what we want to do is push it down in roughly the same angle to match the letter's shape. Now for this one, I actually want it to come up from the top there. Oops, I'll hide the rotation null. And we'll have this come in from the right. And if we just click and drag it, we might push it up or down slightly. So just hold down Shift, which will snap it to horizontal movement only. Now let's select all of these, and then we'll set the starting point to there. By the way, you can also click Alt, open square bracket to set an in point for layers. And then we'll select all the last keyframes, hit F9, keyframe velocity, and 100%, so these come in very quickly. And now it's just a matter of shifting these by a few frames from each other so that they come in one by one. And it's actually very easy to achieve that. So we'll select all of these, and let's say we want to shift these from each other by 3 frames. We'll move forward by 3 frames, 1, 2, 3, hit page down by the way, and then Alt, close square bracket to trim them. And now depending on the order we want these to come in, we're gonna select the first layer that's gonna come in first, and then select the last layer that's gonna come in last. And now right click, keyframe assistant, sequence layers, and hit OK. And we can select all of them, drag them all the way at the end. Now we can hit RAM preview. And of course we do need to play around with the timing. So maybe have this one come in first. So we'll bring this over. So that one comes in first, this one comes in second. Oh, you can see that one's drifting a little bit, and that's because its angle is not perfect. And by the way, you can also notice these Bezier handles, and we can actually make these completely linear. To do that, we'll select all the position keyframes, and then right-click, go over to keyframe interpolation, and set the spatial interpolation to linear. This way, we make sure that these are coming in sharp trajectories. All right, now let's also select all of those. We'll maybe have them start coming in from this point. You can see that as the box is scaling up, the letters start to come in already, and then they keep coming in, and during the same time, the box is also rotating, so the letters rotate with it, seeing as they are also parented. And again, having all of these animations overlap with each other makes it look a lot more dynamic. Now, we do have to take care of a few details, so let's take a look at those next. We'll select all of these, collapse them, and we'll bring back the opacity of the background to 100%. But as we do that, now we can't see the letters coming in because it's the same color. So what I want to do is have these letters be black when they are outside of the box, but be yellow when they are inside of the box. And we are going to use the set matte effect, but instead of doing that on all of these letters one by one, we're going to pre-compose them. First of all, let's duplicate the rotation null and then select the original rotation null together with the letters, and then go over to Layer, Pre-compose, or use the Ctrl-Shift-C shortcut, and we'll call this Navi Letters Tutorial. And before you move your playhead, just make sure you parent the box to the copy of the rotational that we created, because this was parented to the original copy, and that null is now within the Navi Letters Tutorial comp, so this has lost its parent, so make sure you use the duplicated copy we created. And everything should be looking the exact same way as it did before, except now we have contained all of the letters inside of one layer. So what we can do is duplicate this, and we'll call the second copy black. And we'll add a fill effect to this, go over to the effects controls, and we'll make it completely black, which is now rendering on top, so it's hiding the yellow letters. Once they go outside of the box, you can make them out. Let's go ahead and add a set matte effect, and we'll use the box as an invert matte to make sure that these black letters are only visible outside of the box. And there you go, that's pretty much it. Alright, so one last thing to do is have this logo scale down a bit all the way at the end. So we'll select the rotation, show the keyframes, and let's overlap by about 5 frames. And what we'll do is create a new null object, and we'll call this scale, and parent the rotation null and the 2 letters nulls to it. Then hit S, set a keyframe there, move forward by maybe 20 frames, and let's say go down to 75. Now, as soon as we did that, the set matte effect broke down, and this is just an issue we have when using the set matte effect. To quickly fix that, we can toggle the switches here, and just make sure you collapse the transformations of this layer, and now that should render properly. Oh, and if you don't want to deal with that, we can actually delete the set matte effect, and instead we'll duplicate the box, and we'll call this box matte, bring that on top, toggle the switches, and use that as an alpha inverted instead, which is pretty much the same as using the set matte effect. Instead, we do it here in the comp. And this way we don't have to collapse the transformations because everything works as it should. Oh, and of course, let's easy ease this. 100, set an endpoint, and RAM preview. All right, so that's the Navi logo animation done. Let's now move on to the other one. Alright, here I have the Bad News Eagles logo, which is just a PNG file, by the way, because I wasn't able to find the original vector file. Still, it was good enough. If you look down here, I have 4 layers, so I've masked out each of these elements. I can toggle the mask visibility here. I have the top wing, the bottom wing, the top head part, and the bottom head part. And now, if I select all of these, you can see that their anchor points are all set to their respective bounding boxes. However, I want to tweak those. So for the top wing, I'm going to hit Y to bring up the pan behind tool or the anchor point tool. And I'm going to set the anchor point to about here, so at this corner, because I'm going to rotate this and I want it to rotate from that point. Then for the head top, we'll do about there. For the wing bottom, we'll do at this point. And for the head bottom, we'll actually do at pretty much the same point as the wing bottom. And now if we try to rotate any of these, you can see that they rotate or even scale down from that point, which is what we want based on our animation concept. Now let's first hide the head parts so we can focus on the wing animations, and we'll select both of those, hit S to bring up the scale, hold down Shift, hit R, and hold down Shift, hit P. And what we're gonna do is go over to say 2 seconds, and then set a keyframe for all of those, and then we'll go back by 10 frames, we'll set more keyframes, go back, set more keyframes. Now for the first set of keyframes, we're gonna set the initial rotation for both of them. So hit W to bring up the rotation tool, and I want this wing to come in from this side. So something like that. And then for this, we'll do that instead. Then for the middle keyframe, I'm gonna rotate this by say 45 degrees, maybe even more. Let's say maybe 70. And then for the top one, I wanna match the angle. So we'll do something like that. Try to match the angle roughly. And also at this diagonal line, we want it to continue like so. And then we'll drag all of these keyframes over, and then we'll move forward a bit, and then we'll hold these keyframes for a bit. So Control-C to copy those 3, Control-V to paste, and then do the same thing for all these at the bottom. And then all the way at the end, they go back to their original state. So this is the base animation, which for now looks horrible. All right, now let's go back a bit more. Maybe we'll push this up, and we'll also go back all the way at the end, and we'll make sure that these are all set to 0% scale, and we'll select all of them, hit F9 to easy ease them. Now we did add a few extra keyframes that we don't necessarily need. So for example, the scale, I'm just gonna delete these last 2 keyframes, and I'm also not animating the position of the wing bottom, so I'm just gonna delete those. And the 2 scale positions at the end. Now, because of the easing, they do look a bit nicer. However, we do want to shift the timing here a bit. So, for example, at the end here, we want the wing top to start rotating a bit earlier so that they don't intersect with each other. So I'm going to select the rotation values, go forward by maybe 5 frames, and then shift that over. Also, let's do 20 frames for the in animation, select all of them, and then have them start at frame 10, which you can see over here. By the way, you can control click on that to alternate the display style, and then drag these over there. And then let's say have this come in at about 1 second and hold there for about a second as well. And then all the way at the end, we can take about 40 frames to have it go over to the final state. Now let's tweak the easing. So we'll select the scale keyframes on both of these layers and then control click on them to switch them back to linear and hit F9 once again, because sometimes as you move these keyframes around, the easing tends to mess up. So this way we just make sure that these are set to 33 by 33. As for the 2 keyframes of the rotation at the end, let's maybe set those to 75 and also the position. Oh, and one thing I'm noticing is that the wing bottom rotation is starting a bit later, but I actually want it to end at the same time. We still have no overlapping going on, but things are looking good. Oh, and one thing I thought of right now is we could actually add some curvature to the position of this wing top. So let's say select this point and we'll do something like that, which looks a bit nicer in my opinion. Let's also select these 2 keyframes, right click, and we'll set the outgoing velocity to 50, and the same goes for this one, so they don't start rotating very quickly. And I'm thinking this one is actually a bit too stiff as well. So we'll select the rotations, do 75, and the position on this, 75. Oh, and also the scale. By the way, you might have guessed by now that 75 is pretty much my favorite number when it comes to easing. And maybe even push these by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looking good, looking fresh. Now, as I'm doing this, I noticed that this logo animation isn't really that technical or complicated. It's just that it takes some time to tweak the timing of the keyframes and the easing and all that stuff. So bear with me as we try to make this a bit more interesting. Let's go ahead and create a new null object, and this will be our shake. Shake it, shake it. With it selected, we'll hit Control Space and type in wiggle, which will bring up these presets, and we'll add the wiggle position preset. By the way, you can do the same thing by typing it over here, so wiggle position, and just click and drag that into your null. And what we want to do is bring up the position, and then alt click on it, and add an expression. So we'll do wiggle, open parentheses, and for the first value, which is the frequency, even though it says speed here, we'll parent it to that. Then we'll type in comma, and we'll parent it to the amount. So essentially, if I just hit return twice here, the wiggle effect takes into account 2 values. So we type in wiggle, open parentheses, frequency, so how often this layer wiggles, and by how much, or the amplitude. And these 2 values correspond to these 2 values up here. So we'll delete that, and then click away, and with the null selected, we can solo it out. You can see that it's shaking as we move the playhead. Now for the speed, I'm gonna set it to 15, and this is dependent on your frame rate. So if you have a 30 frames per second comp, even if you push this over 30, it's gonna cap at 30 because you only have 30 frames to work with. In that case, you're only gonna be able to shake this null by 30 times per second. If you want more, just make sure you crank up the frame rate of your comp. Anyway, we'll set this back to 15, and the amount, we don't wanna have this go too far in all directions, so we'll set this to 15 as well. And now we'll keyframe the amount. So we'll set a keyframe there, hit U to bring up the keyframes, and let's unsolo that, and we'll bring the keyframe over to this point. So by the time these wings emerge, we want the amount to be all the way at 15. Then we'll set a keyframe there where the keyframes hold. And then all the way at the end, once the wings go back to their initial state, the amount is also gonna go down to 0. So we no longer have shake. And we'll do the same thing at the beginning here. Then select all of these, hit F9, and we'll also 75%, maybe even 50 on that. Oh, and make sure to select both the wings and parent it to the shake. And now we can preview that. So you can see the shake gives us the impression that this eagle is flying at high speeds. But as it is now, it's a headless eagle. So let's bring back the head layers and we'll go over to the end here. Just make sure you parent the head bottom to the wing bottom and the head top to the wing top. And this way they follow the wings, but we also want to have them scale up. So hit U to bring up the keyframes. We'll go over to where the rotation starts at the end. Move forward by 10 frames. Select the head top, hit S, set a keyframe there. We'll move forward by 20 frames. set a keyframe, and we'll do the same thing here, move forward by 10, S, move forward by 20, and again, set a keyframe, set these down to 0, and this one to 0. Then we can select all of those, hit F9, select these last two, do 75, and we'll preview that. Now, another thing that's irritating me is that the logo as a whole is not centered properly to the comp across the entire animation, and we can easily fix that by animating the position of the null. So we'll set a keyframe there, we'll go over to the end, make sure this is the last position the null is going to be at, and then we'll move back a bit. And now we want to maybe push this up so that the wings themselves are centered to the comp. Maybe we can toggle the title action safe here, do Ctrl-Shift-H to hide the UI elements, and then hold down Shift, maybe push this up. Then we'll go back, set another keyframe, and then go over to the very first keyframe, and we also want to bring these down so they are roughly at the center like so. And then move that over, hit F9, and do the usual 75% at the end. Maybe 50 on this one. And now when we preview it, you can see that the logo as a whole is constantly sitting at the center of the frame, roughly. All right, so that's the main elements of the logo done. But we're actually going to push this a bit further and add some line streaks to make the wings look like they're actually flying. Let's create a new layer and we'll call it Flying Lines. Color doesn't matter, but we'll set it to 1080p by 1080p so we have a square solid. Then we'll add the turbulent noise effect, which is pretty much the same as the fractal noise, but it renders a bit faster. Now let's increase the contrast a lot, 2000 or so, and then we'll decrease the brightness so we're left with very few patches of light here. Then we'll move down to the complexity and set it to 2. Now let's go back up to transform and we'll uncheck the uniform scaling and we'll set the scale width all the way down to 1. You can see it actually doesn't go down past 20, so you have to type it in. And then for the height, we'll scale it all the way up. And again, it caps at 600, but we can actually type in 1000. So we have these very long lines. Now there is one issue that we have, and that is it's not completely white lines. You can see there's some gray values here. So to crush those values, we'll add a levels effect. And we'll scroll down, set the input white all the way down to 1, which will now crush those gray values and leave us with solid looking lines. However, right now we have a bunch of lines, so we can tweak that by dialing down the brightness to maybe minus 500 or so. And still they are looking a bit too thin at this point, so we can also use the minimax effect, just like we did before, but this time we're going to use the color channel to expand it. So let's say set it to 3 or 4, and now we have thicker lines. If you also want to change the color of these, we can maybe say shut this off for a moment and then add a tint effect and just pick the color from the logo itself and then turn it back on. And of course, this doesn't have transparency, so you could either set this to lighten, which will get rid of the black values and keep the bright values as they are so they won't influence the lightness of anything underneath. Or you could set this back to normal and just bring it underneath these layers, whichever way you want. As they are right now, they're not animating. So to do that, we're gonna go over to the transform and animate the offset turbulence. So we'll set a keyframe here, hit U, and we'll bring this at the beginning. And then all the way at the end here, we'll actually crank up the Y value to go up, I don't know, maybe like 10,000, so we can solo it out and preview it. Now you might be noticing some empty areas here and then some lines and empty areas again. And to tweak that, we can go over to the evolution and just crank this up until we have something that fills in more of those gaps. So around 190 or so. And also I would say maybe tone down the radius to 2. So the lines aren't as thick. All right, now unsolo this and we'll select the layer, go over to the anchor point tool and we'll click on the anchor point and hold down Control to snap it to the top center point. Now let's move back a bit and we'll bring this over at the center here and then rotate it a bit, maybe even shrink it horizontally like so. I'm trying to keep the bounding box contained inside of the logo. And also make sure you stretch this down so that it moves past the comp. Now the lines are looking pretty good, but we have the issue of having them visible across the entire animation. So we're gonna have the lines come in at the beginning and then go out at the end. And to do that, we're gonna use the linear wipe effect. And we'll set the wipe angle for the first one to 0. So that way they're gonna transition from the top, set a keyframe there, and then we'll try to find a timing here for when to have them appear. Maybe starting from frame 15, we'll move forward by maybe 30 frames and then set this down to 0. And then maybe from this point on, we'll add another linear wipe effect. And this time we'll set the angle to 180 and set a keyframe there, hit U to reveal it in the timeline, and then move forward by another 30 frames and have it go down to 100. so they kind of vanish like so. Alright, so there you go, we're done with the BNE logo animation as well. But now let's move on to the next logo animation. Next up, I have the face logo, which is made up by these two layers, one being the outline, which is sitting at the top, and the other being the inside fill color. Now, we want to create multiple copies of the outline shape and shift them each by a few hundred pixels from each other in Z space, but we don't want to do that manually. So we'll hit F4 to toggle the switches and turn these two into 3D layers first of all. Let's now create a new null, and we'll call this offset. And then we'll add two slider controllers. For the first one, we'll call it index offset, and then hit Ctrl D to duplicate, and we'll call this one Z shift. Bear with me for a moment, these will all make sense as we set them up. Now let's lock the effects controls panel so we can see it at all times. And for the outline, we'll duplicate that, and we'll call this simply outline, because we want to keep the top outline as it is right now, but then shift all the other outlines. So we'll hit P, bring up the position, and we'll alt click on the position, and now we'll type in an expression. First of all, let's create a variable for our index offset. So we'll type in index offset and then type in equals and pick whip it to the index offset and then semicolon, then hit return to go to a new row. And this time we'll do Z shift and we'll do equals, open parentheses, type in index. The index term refers to the index number of each layer here. And then we'll do minus the index offset. So Control C to copy that and Control V to paste there. And then we'll multiply this by the Z shift amount. Semicolon again. Now I'll make some more room here and type in one last line, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at what everything is doing here. So we'll open square bracket, type in value, and just as before, we'll access the X, which is value 0, and then we'll do value 1, which is the Y value, and then finally we'll do value 2, which is the Z value. And we want to leave the X and Y as they are. We don't want to touch those, but we do want to add the Z shift onto the Z value. And now when we click away, nothing is going to happen yet because the Z shift is set to 0. But if we increase that, now you're going to be able to notice that this layer is being shifted by whatever we set here. Now, if we duplicate this, each copy is then going to be shifted more and more. Now, let me just delete these real quick, and I'll show you why we created this index offset. So the only reason we need this one is because the index number is defined by the ordering of our layers. So right now we have 2 more layers on top of this outline. The index number right now is 3. And if we look down here into the comp, what we're doing is we're taking the index number, which is 3. So I'll just make a new row here so I can demonstrate it. So we're doing 3 minus the index offset, which right now is set to 0. And then we're multiplying it by the Z shift, which right now is 121. And because these are in parentheses, they are going to be calculated first. So we end up with 3 times 121, which is 363, which you can see right here. And that is being defined on this other row. So X value, which is 960, by Y value, which is 540, Z value, which is originally 0, but we're adding the Z shift, which is 363, and that is giving us 363. Now let me just delete these real quick and then click away and bring this all the way at the top. So the index number is now 1. What happens now? Well, now you can see that the Z value is 121 instead, because the index value has changed. And that's why we introduced this index offset variable so that we can control the index number regardless of where this is positioned in the layer stack. So even if this is set to layer number 3 and the Z is back to 363, if we offset the index by 2, we can now have the correct value here because the index is being minused by the index offset. So 3 minus index offset, which is 2, is 1, times 121, which we have set up here, is 121, and then Z value, which is 0, plus Z shift, which is 121, is 121. And at this point, I feel like I'm teaching math, but hopefully all of that makes sense. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this a few more times until we have about 6 copies, and then we can go over to the Z shift and just increase this to determine by how much these layers shift from each other. And now if I select all of these, hit P, you can see that they are all shifted from each other by 300 pixels on the Z axis, whereas the outline top is at 0, so it is indeed sitting right on top there. Now we'll go ahead and create a new camera. And we'll make this a very wide angle lens, so 15 millimeters, hit OK. We can hit C and then hold down Alt, right click to dolly in and out. You can see that it's actually dollying in where the cursor is, but we can Control Z to undo and then go over to the dolly tool, click and hold on it and make sure you switch to dolly to camera point of interest instead. And this way, we make sure we dolly in towards the point of interest of our camera. And because we have a very wide angle lens, we're able to pass through each of these individual layers and then click the camera, go to layer, transform, reset. So we're back to what we had before. Let's quickly animate the position of our camera. So hit P, set a keyframe there. We'll move forward to say 3 seconds, set a keyframe there. And we'll go back to the beginning and we'll push this all the way until we no longer see any of the copies. And then we'll select the last one, hit F9, right click, keyframe velocity, and we'll do 75%. Maybe push this back to 2 seconds and then even do 50 instead. Now the stop at the end does look a bit rough in my opinion. So what we can do is create a new null object. We'll turn this into a 3D layer and we'll do extra dolly and we'll parent the camera to it. Hit P for this, set a keyframe, and we'll go over to say 4 seconds and then go back to maybe 1 and we'll push even further, maybe something like 300. We'll F9 both of those and for this one we'll do 100. And this way, even though the camera comes to a stop, it's still gonna slightly dolly out to have a more smoother stop instead. Maybe you can push this even further. I believe there's a big gap between the first outline and the second one. So that's because, again, we've added a few more layers here, so the index number has shifted. And to correct for that, we can simply increase the index offset to 5. And this way, the gap will be the same throughout. And now we actually have to correct the position so it doesn't shoot out too far. And we'll finally do 75% on that. Now let's go ahead and re-enable the inner logo matte color. Now what we want to do is make sure that the inside of this logo is completely orange. So when we go inside, we want to have this entire background be orange. So let's go ahead and quickly just set the background color to be the same as the orange from the logo, like so. But now when we reach the end, we want this outer side to be white. An easy fix for that would be to just duplicate the background layer and we'll turn this back to a white color. Then toggle the switches and make sure this is set to 3D. And then toggle the switches again and we'll set this one to alpha invert the inner logo matte. And to show you a bit more clearly what is going on, we can set this over to a custom view and just orbit around. You can see that we're cutting a hole into this white background layer based on the shape of the phase inner logo. So the camera can actually push through it. All right, so that's looking pretty slick. Now we do need to make sure we fade out the individual outline copies so that we're only left with the phase logo itself all the way at the end. And to do that, we're gonna use some more expressions. Let's first start off by renaming our offset null to offset and fade. And we'll go ahead and add another slider controller. And this one will be called start fade. Then duplicate it and we'll do end fade. Then we'll twirl open the opacity for one of these outlines and we'll alt click on it. Now I'm not gonna type in anything. Instead, I'm gonna copy over an existing expression from my second monitor. So Control C, Control V to paste there. And I have to give credit where credit is due. I did not come up with this expression. I actually copied it over from a forum, which I will leave the link to in the description. Essentially what we're doing is we're declaring two variables, which is the start fade and end fade point. Then we're also referencing our camera by using this comp.activeCamera. And then we're calculating the distance between the camera and the object, which in this case is the outline 6. And as soon as this object reaches a certain distance away from the camera, which we're gonna set by the start fade value, then it's gonna start fading. And by the time it reaches the end value or the end fade, it's gonna be 0% opacity or completely transparent. One thing to note is that we wanna make sure that this line corresponds to the start fade value and this line corresponds to the end fade value, just in case you get any errors. Now, when we click away and say solo the outline, nothing is gonna happen yet, but let's say set the start fade, so when this is gonna start fading, to maybe 300. So as soon as it hits 300 pixels away from the camera, it's gonna start fading. And by the time it hits, let's say, 600 pixels away from the camera, it's gonna be completely transparent. Now you can dial this in to whatever you want, but before we do that, we'll select the opacity, go over to edit, copy expression only, and then select all of these outlines and hit Control V to paste, and that will apply the expression to all of the opacity values of these layers. And now we can play around with the start fade and end fade. So we'll crank this up a lot and unsolo this and go all the way at the end. Now let's lower the start fade to something like 300 and just make sure you lower the end fade to something like 1000 so that by the time we reach the final position of our camera, all of those outlines are faded out. Now you can tweak the start fade to whatever you like. So you can see by setting things up with an expression, we actually have to worry about only two values instead of going in and animating the opacity of each of these individual elements separately. And then say anytime we want to make a change, we have to go into the keyframes and play around with the timing and ease in and all that. Whereas this way, the expression handles everything for us. Now, I do want to say that expressions can be intimidating sometimes. And trust me, I'm not that familiar with them either. As I said before, I've actually copied this expression from a forum and just made it work for my project. But it's totally worth spending some time and trying to implement expressions. You do the heavy lifting at the beginning and then let the expressions do the rest for you. Huge time saver. Plus, it makes you feel like a programmer even when you're not. All right, so with that out of the way, let's now take a look at the last logo animation for today's episode. All right, now here we have the final logo, which is from Liquid. So I have the base outline, which is the outline by itself. Then we have all of the wing elements. Then there's the horse itself, the base, and the base outline fill, which we're gonna parent to the base outline. And this way we can scale up the outline and we can get to reveal the white shape in between the base and the base outline. As for the horse, you can see that I've actually made it a bit larger than it needs to be so that when we have it come in and rotate and all that, we don't actually see the edges, but we do need to contain it within the base shape. So we'll add the set matte effect and we'll make sure we choose the base, and that way it will cut off the extra fat there. Now let me quickly scale this up just a little bit. And once we zoom in here, you can see that we can still make out this very thin outline of the base. And that's because we're working with pixels, so we can sometimes get these weird issues. And a quick and easy fix for that would be to add a simple choker effect to the base. So we can really subtly choke it by maybe like 2 pixels or so, and that will get rid of that outline. All right, now let's bring this back to 70%. Now let's also parent the wings to the horse so that they move with the horse. And in fact, I want to tweak the anchor point and set it to about here so that the horse rotates from that point. And also parent the horse to the base. Now let's quickly hide all of these inner elements so we can focus on the base animation. Let's go ahead and go over to frame 0. We'll select the base outline and the base, hit S, set a keyframe for those. Then let's move forward by maybe 20 frames, set another keyframe, and then another 20 frames and set a keyframe there. We'll go back all the way at the beginning. We'll set these down to 0%, whereas at the middle keyframes, we actually want to overshoot these a bit. So we'll set the scale for the base outline to 100, and the base, we'll set it to 80. And now just to give that a quick preview, you see that the base outline is scaling up a bit more than the base so that we can reveal that inner white shape. But of course, we do need to ease these. So we'll select all of them, hit F9, then we'll select the last 2 keyframes. We'll do keyframe velocity 75. And for the middle ones, we'll do 50 on both sides. And in fact, we'll actually drag both of these 2 keyframes by 5 frames backwards. And this way, the outline scales up a bit sooner and also scales down a bit sooner as well. So we have a more interesting animation. Now I do want to add some bounce all the way at the end here. So as it settles in, I want it to bounce a bit as well and then come back to its original scale. But I don't want to animate that on both of the layers individually. I actually want to do that on a separate null and then parent those to that. So we'll create a new null object and we'll call this bounce. Then we'll select both of these, parent them to the bounce, and then hit S. And we'll go back a bit to say frame 25 or so. Hit the stopwatch. Then we'll move forward by 10 frames, set a keyframe, and then maybe by 20 frames or so, and then set a keyframe again. And for the middle one, we'll actually just scale this down just a little bit to maybe like 90, and then easy ease those. I'll do the same thing, 50 by 50, and then 75% on the last one. And there you go, we have this very smooth looking bouncy animation. Now we'll bring back up the horse. We'll select it, hit P, hold down Shift, hit R, and let's say go back a bit, so maybe to around here where the outline comes in and is at its maximum size. We want to set a keyframe there for the position, and we'll move forward by maybe 20 frames, set a keyframe there, go back, and we'll bring this all the way down. Remember to hold down Shift so it snaps vertically. Then we can F9, do 75, see how that looks. But let's also make it seem like he's lifting his head. So we'll set a keyframe for the rotation. Bring this over, go to the end, do that. And we'll go back by 10 and then set a keyframe there. and we'll do F9 on those. And now for the middle keyframe, let's overshoot it a bit by maybe minus 10 degrees. And then for the first one, we'll rotate it all the way down like so. And we're actually gonna shift these over a bit. So you can see it comes up and bounces a bit. Now it is a bit too intense, so maybe we'll do 30 and push these back over a bit. All right, so after you play around with the timing and easing, you should end up with something like this. Another thing I did to the horse was to animate the eye and also the mouth. So we'll select it, go down to the contents under horse, and down here I have the horse body, and bring back the mask shapes. And we can set a keyframe for that, bring it over, and then over here on this keyframe, we can actually make it seem like it's closed. And of course match this with a timing. So maybe have it start here. We'll push it over so we can actually notice the mouth being opened. And also leave a bit of gap here and have him close his eye for a moment as well. So that's underneath the eye path. Set a keyframe there, move this over, set another keyframe, move it over, and set another keyframe. Now on the middle one, we'll just animate the top one to just go down like that. And you can see this is a linear point. So we can click G, hold down Alt, and turn this into a Bezier handle, and then just bring it down so we have a curved line there. But because we set those outer keyframes beforehand, it will go back to being a sharp point. And let's adjust the timing here. So maybe by 5 frames each. And then hit F9 on those, see how that looks. All right, looking good so far. So let's now also integrate the wings, or whatever you want to call them. We'll start by turning them all on, selecting all of them, hit P to bring up the position. Then we'll move forward by maybe 10 frames, set a keyframe there, and we'll go back to the first ones, and we'll just push them down in the direction that roughly matches the shape of our wings. And ignore the overlapping here, we'll fix that in a bit. Now let's also trim the endpoint and set these all to F9 with 75% easing. And again, we could shift these in time manually, but we're gonna use the good old trick of trimming these layers first, then selecting the first and last one, right click, keyframe assistant, sequence layers, hit OK, drag the length, and then reposition them to maybe around this point. Now, as you can see, we have some issues. First of all, these are sticking out of the base, and as they're coming in, because some of these are a bit larger, they're actually visible around this area. So with nothing selected, we'll hit G to bring up the pen tool, and we'll sort of roughly mask out this area. And this will be our horse side wings cutout, and we'll shut it off, and we'll also parent it to the horse so it moves with it. Then on one of the wings, we'll add the set matte effect, and we'll use that layer to cut it out. But just make sure you set it to invert matte. Now let's also duplicate the set matte effect. And for this one, we'll use the base, but this time we'll uncheck invert matte so it's only visible within the base. And now let's go ahead and select both of these, Control C to copy, and we'll paste them to all the other wings. So you can see now they no longer appear in areas where they shouldn't, and they no longer poke out of the base. Now I'm thinking these are shifted in time by a bit too much. So let's correct that. We'll select all of them, hit Alt Home to bring them back to the beginning, and we'll do 1, 2, 3 instead, trim them. Select the first one, select the last one, right click, keyframe assistant, sequence layers, hit OK, increase the length, and then reposition the timing. So there's not too much of a gap in between them coming in. Maybe push them over a little bit more, and also select the horse and bring it over as well so it comes in a bit sooner. All right, so there you go. We're finally done with the liquid logo animation as well. Now do keep in mind that this or any other logo animation that we've done during the tutorial probably doesn't look nearly as good as the original versions I created. And that's to be expected because I did spend a lot more time dialing in those animations. And at the end of the day, the point of these tutorials is not to show you how to specifically create Liquid's logo animation or Navi's logo animation. I'm just trying to show you different kinds of techniques that we can use to achieve these logo animations. And that way you get a better sense of how you can use these techniques in your own projects. With that said, let's move on to the outro of this tutorial. Alright guys, we finally reached the end of the tutorial, so thanks for watching and being patient all the way through. Again, I challenge you to go grab your favorite team's logo and try to animate it by using techniques that you've learned in this tutorial. And again, if you happen to post it on social media platforms, then don't forget to also tag me. Remember to download the project files on my Gumroad page completely for free, while also having the option to support the channel with a donation. You can watch a bunch of other tutorials in the channel right now, and most of them include free project files. There's a bunch more goodness coming your way in the future, so if you don't want to miss out, then make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the bell to be notified. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.